Hi, everyone. I'm Tanya Clevs. I'm the daughter of Arnold Clevs.
And in Israel, I probably would refer to myself as Avraham ben Eliezer Alevi.
We're coming to you live from Chicago, so a little bit of a time difference, but we're so happy to be here right now. And obviously today, is Yom HaShoah, and my father went through the Holocaust and is happy to share his story with everyone. And thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to his incredible story. A little bit of a background on my dad. He was born in Kaunas, Lithuania in 1933, and he was in the Kaunas Ghetto and was transported to 11 different concentration camps and was liberated in 1945 and was sent to Italy to live in an orphanage and then immigrated to America in 1949.
1949.
So we're just going to start. We have a few, key points we wanted to touch with you guys, and forgive us, it's a little bit rough, but hopefully everyone can hear us and can follow along easily. So my father's going to begin with how the Germans invaded Lithuania, and there's a few points that we feel are really important. So Dad, if you want to take it away.
Yeah, okay. Thank you for having me. I was 8 years old when the war started. Sunday morning, we heard bombing, we saw planes fly by, and my father and my sister and my mom, we all went down to spend the rest of the day on a Sunday in the basement. The following day in the morning on Monday, my father said that it's not safe to be in a big city. We'll go towards the Russian border to run away from the advancing soldiers, German army. As we started out in the morning, the highway was packed with people. Many people had the same idea of leaving town. And this was my first experience with seeing dead bodies, horses with their bellies open. The Germans were strafing the highways constantly. On the highway, we got separated from my father. He had a bicycle, and he put all our important things on the bike, and we stopped a Russian military truck if we could get a ride with them. So they said they'll just take me, my mom, and my sister. They wouldn't take my father with a bicycle. So we got separated. After a short ride on the truck stopped. We were strafed again. We hid under the trunk, and then they told us they will not take us again. So we kept walking. We walked all day long until we reached a little town. A lady met us on the street. She says, "You're Jewish, aren't you?" I said, "Yes." "Where are you going?" She said, "We're going toward the Russian border." She says, "You're too late. Come, I will pick you, we'll put you up for the night." So we stayed there during the night. There was a heavy bombardment. And we woke up in the morning. We didn't know what was happening. So my mother sent me out to the street to see what was going on. As I went out on the main street, I saw the German army coming through with tanks, infantry, everything. And all the Lithuanians standing on the side were cheering the German army coming through, yelling Heil Hitler. And I was 8 years old. I realized right there, I'm in danger here. Sure enough, they started looking at me and said, "Oh, the Jidas is here, the Jew is here." I ran away, went back to my mom and my sister, and I told them what happened. And obviously we couldn't continue walking towards the Russian border anymore. So we decided to go back home. We rented a little rowboat because it was close to the river. A Lithuanian man, he rowed the boat with us for about an hour. We were stopped by a German patrol on the
No, but you saw the Russian, the soldiers' bodies.
Yeah,
right?
After I get into the rowboat.
Yeah.
The German patrol pointed out that we should come over to the to be inspected. We didn't pay attention quickly. Anyway, they pointed their rifles at us, and we got off the boat. And what really shocked me is I saw all the Russian dead soldiers floating in the river. It made a unbelievable impression on me, all the dead bodies floating. Anyway, the German patrol took a photograph of us and they let us go. When we wanted to go back into the boat, the owner of the boat says, I'm afraid I'm not taking you anymore. So we started walking again. So we were walking towards Kovna, going back home, and the German army was walking towards Russia. And I'll never forget when they saw us, they said, oh, Juden, nach Palästina fahren. We came to the outskirts of Kovna, and we were quickly arrested by German patrols and their Lithuanian collaborators. We were locked up in a place that used to be a barracks for soldiers. And the Lithuanians tried to play games with us. They were all pointing the rifles into the windows and shooting on the ceiling, frightening us. Then they went in and took out the good-looking girls. We never saw them again. My sister was 16 at that time. She was a very beautiful girl, and my mother covered her up with blankets so they won't find her. Then we were taken to another jail. It was called the Ninth Fort. This is a place where the most difficult prisoners were locked up. A horrible place. And my mother spoke to one of the Lithuanians who guarded us, an officer. She says, you know, we don't belong here because my husband was a volunteer in the Lithuanian army right after World War I. And he looked it up a day later, and he said, you're right, your husband was a volunteer. I'm letting you go. So my mother and my sister and I let us go. We walked towards home, and when we came home, we found my father. After separating on the highway a few days ago, he managed to get home before us. Then the edicts came out, every day something else. The Jews have to walk on the street, are not allowed to walk on the sidewalk. If you see a Gentile or a Lithuanian or a German, we have to take off our hats 10 paces in front of him and bow down. Anyone who had a radio had to turn in the radio. Valuables had to turn in valuables. Within a few months, this was in June, few months, they announced that we all have to go to a ghetto. The ghetto was in Slobodka, which is a suburb of Kovna. A little point I want to make is that the ghetto had a big pogrom just a day before the Germans came in. Lithuanians killed most of the yeshiva bocharim in the famous Slobodka yeshiva. And any Jew they could lay their hands on. They hacked them with axes and knives. The way the ghetto worked was that we had to exchange apartments. We went to Slobodka, we found a Gentile family. They had one little room and a little kitchen, no indoor plumbing, and they went to our apartment, a 3-bedroom apartment with indoor plumbing and everything else in there. So this was the exchange. In the ghetto, it was very, very turbulent. Every few days, they used to come in, grab Jews, take them out. We never saw them again. I had a window in a little place where we lived, looking out towards the main street in the ghetto. So I could see what was going on all the time. One day I was sitting in the window and I saw our personal physician walk, and he didn't take his hat off fast enough when a German came towards him. He just took out his gun and killed him right there in front of my eyes. The big selection in Kaunas, we were about 25,000 people when we came in. At 5 o'clock in the morning, they announced that everyone has to assemble in a big plaza. It was a very cold day, it was snowing. And the Germans came with their helpers, Lithuanians and Ukrainians, and they started selecting to the right or to the left, to the right or the left. It lasted all day long. Towards the end of the day, we were the last group of 100 to be selected. They grabbed my father and me, I was holding on to him, and pulled us to the left, which was to be killed. My mother spotted her. She grabbed a hold of my father, she was a strong woman, and pulled him back to the right side. And this is how we were saved that evening. They took out 10,000 people that day, October the 28th, 1941. They killed 10,000 the following day. They took them to the same place where I was before, the 9th Fort, and that's where they shot them. After a few years in the ghetto, with constant selections, 100 here, 100 there, going out to work. My parents went to work and they arranged for me to, if something happens, if I see Germans coming, I should hide under the floor. So one day I saw Germans coming, I hid under the floor and they came into that room. I heard them walking back and forth, and when they left, I crawled out. There was constant danger. A few years later, two years later, 1943, they took us out, about 1,500 people, to a working camp, also in the suburb of Kaunas. There they separated men from women, and the most horrible experience in that camp was the children selection. My father in that labor camp was in charge of keeping the place clean, so he didn't go to work in the morning. And all of a sudden he noticed trucks pull up to the camp. He realized that something terrible was going to happen. He ran into the barrack where I was sitting there with a few smaller children, 9, 10-year-olds. We were playing, and since he was very much acquainted with the barrack, how it was built, he opened up a plank of wood above the place where we slept. He opened it up and he shoved us in on the roof. We were hiding there while the Germans came in and had the children selection. They went from barrack to pull out the children and the elderly. Through the cracks in the ceiling, I saw what was happening. They worked very fast, and they grabbed children by an arm, by a leg, and threw them into the truck. The selection took about an hour. When they left, my father came and took us out from the hiding place. In the evening, when all the people came back from work to their barracks, they didn't find their children anymore. The crying was unbelievable. The mothers whose children my father saved, they hugged them and kissed them. And yet the other women said, why couldn't you save my child? We were in that camp for about a year. The Russian army was approaching Lithuania, so they decided to liquidate the camp. They marched us out. By the way, after the children's selection, I had to go out and work with the adults. They dressed me up in a long coat, so I will not be by myself in the barracks as a child. They marched us towards the trains. As we crossed the river to the train station, I remember very distinctly that one man jumped on the railing of the bridge. He yelled out, Shema Israel, and he jumped from the bridge into the river. The guards immediately started shooting at him. I saw his head bop up and down a couple of times, and then he disappeared. On the train, they separated men from women. We were on the train probably about 2 days. It stopped. They took all the women away, and I stayed with my father. Again, we went towards Germany. I could see the scenery change, more modern. We stopped not far from Munich. They let us out of the trains. They marched us towards a concentration camp called Landsberg. It was a satellite camp from Dachau. But what I remember going into that camp in Landsberg is there were SS soldiers on one side, a row, SS soldiers on the other side. We walked in between them to go to our barracks, and they were standing there with sticks and hitting us as we marched to the barracks. I was in that camp maybe a week, 10 days, and they had another selection. They took out all the children who were there. We were 131 boys. I remember my father saying goodbye to me. I see his face in front of me, helpless, couldn't do a thing. Either if it would have made a scene, they would have shot me and shot him on top of it. The 131 boys were put on trucks and they took us to Dachau. In Dachau, we were there probably again about 2 weeks, and they again marched to train stations, put us on trains, and we were on the way to Birkenau, Auschwitz. I would say we were on the train, I don't know, maybe 3 days, 4 days. Out of the 131 boys, 2 of them decided to jump the train and escape. The reason that some decided to jump is when we came to a train station where the train was loading up water or coal, whatever, we asked the people on the station, where is this train going? And some Polish people pointed with their hands, they went like this. They're going to kill us. So this is why 2 immediately decided to jump. One, as we saw to the cracks of the cattle car, was able to run into the forest. The second one who jumped, he didn't get up. He must have hit his head or got killed, we don't know. The boy who who survived the war in a farm, Polish farm. And he made Aliyah, and then he fought in the Yom Ha'atzmaut War. He was a little older than me. The arrival in Birkenau was late at night. We were taken off the train. We were now 129 boys. As the German soldiers marched us, I didn't know what was happening. I asked the guard in German, "Where are you taking us?" He told me to shut my mouth. They brought us to the crematorium to be gassed. Our group was an amazing group of boys. The oldest one in our group was very strict with the smaller children. When we marched, it was like a group of soldiers. When we had to take off our hats in front of the Germans, he gave the command, we took off the hats and stood at attention. When we stood in front of the crematorium, the German officers were very impressed, apparently impressed with this group of young boys. And they were discussing what to do with us. And one of the SS guys says, "Let them go into the camp." We were the only group of children who came to Birkenau not to be killed the same day. They took us to Lager A in Birkenau. After a short period of time, they tattooed us. And the way they tattooed is, you stood in line. A guy who tattooed me said to me, "It's going to be painful." A Jewish man, he says, "But don't forget the SS man is right behind me. If you cry, they'll shoot you." Obviously very not sanitary the way they tattooed everyone with the same pen. My hand swelled up afterwards. It was all puffy and pussy. I used to go to the water place and run cold water over it. I didn't dare to go to ask a doctor there to help me. And it healed by itself. Then on Yom Kippur, they had the big selection where the notorious Mengele did the selection. We all lined up, the 129 boys, impeccably dressed. He had gloves in his hand, and he went to right to the left, right to the left. He stops in front of me, and he says, "How old are you?" I said, "I'm 14. I wasn't. By that time, I was 10 years old." He says, "You're a liar." So he hits me over the face with his gloves. He says, "Drop your pants." I dropped my pants. He says, "Take off your shirt." I took off my shirt. He says, "Turn around." He says, "How come you're so brown?" I said, "Look, I only have one shirt. I want to save it. When the sun shines, I take off my shirt. That's why I have such a sun tan." He looked at me again, and went to the next boy, took him out to be killed. Next one took him, and he passed me up. The way it works, anyone who was told to be killed, there was a scribe with a big board writing down the tattoo number that had to be killed. We went back into the barracks. Following morning, anyone whose name was written down were taken out to be gassed. One of my little friends knew what was happening when they took him out, and he yelled out, "Jewish blood is not water." Then, after 5 months being there working, every day, going out in the morning. It was hell every day. My only place where I felt safe was go to the toilet. I tried to hide in the toilet knowing that a German officer was not going to come in, where honored people have to go in. Then came the liquidation of Birkenau. They marched us out on a cold day. It was January the 19th, 5 o'clock in the morning. They paired us, me and my friend. He got a little can of meat, and I got a little piece of bread. That's what we had to share between us. We started walking. We walked all day. We walked all night. We walked the following day all day, non-stop, very cold day. And the rule was, if you step out of the column that you're walking, they shoot you. I had to relieve myself. I had to do something. So I stepped out of the column, but I had an adult coat, and I had a string around it so it won't fall down. And I wore wooden shoes, and wooden shoes collect snow. So I was always an inch or two taller. It was very difficult to walk like this. Now, as I stepped out to relieve myself, the SS guard takes his rifle, he bolts it, and he puts it, and he wants to shoot me because I was out of the column. I said to him, I am done. I'm done. Don't shoot. I pulled up my pants and held my coat as best as I could. And I ran back into the column, and I wanted to join my friends who walked with me. By the time I reached them, I was totally exhausted. They held me. My friends grabbed me under the arms, and we walked together. The night came again, and there was an air raid, and they told us all to lie down on the ground. I lied down, and I fell asleep. I couldn't get up. So when they told us all to get up again, my friends helped me up, and we walked again. We came to a camp. So we walked about 3 days, 4 nights. And when we came to the camp, I stretched out on one of the bunks, and someone stole my piece of bread, which I had in my pocket. I wake up and I don't find my bread, and I tell my friend, someone stole my bread. So they looked around and they saw another man, a middle-aged guy, eating. So they figured he is the one who stole my bread, and they beat him up and took away the bread and brought it back to me. In that camp, we were probably a week, 10 days. They took us out again. We marched towards the train station. They loaded us up, about 80 people in a cattle car. And on the train, we stopped someplace, and there was an air raid, and Allied planes bombed the train station. Obviously, they didn't know that there were Jewish prisoners in the train, and they strafed the whole plane. There was a boy sitting next to me. When the air raid was over, I pushed him, he fell over, and a row of bullets were all in his back, sitting right next to me. There's another boy, real dear friend of mine, we went to kindergarten together. A bullet went through his hat. He pulls off his hat, he says, "Can you believe it? They ruined my hat." Uh, then on this train, they didn't give us food, didn't give us water, and they had one bucket to relieve ourselves. But the worst was no water. I used to scrape with my fingernails the wall so I could get some frost off, to get some moisture in my mouth. We arrived in Mauthausen, and when they took us off the train, they put us in showers. And the greatest pleasure I had in the shower is standing there with my mouth open and getting the water in my mouth. After the shower, they took us to barracks, all naked. It was cold, very cold. I ran naked to the barracks, and then they handed us out clothing. I was fortunate enough to find a pair of shoes. In that camp, Mauthausen, they decided to separate us again. Mauthausen had two levels, a high level and a lower level. They put us in the lower level. We were there about a month, and then they took us out and put us in a camp called Zeltenlager. It's a camp made all of tents. There were thousands and thousands of Hungarian Jews. And there was just no order there. No food, nothing, no toilet facility, nothing. And people were just walking and dropping. You just had to walk over them. One evening, I wanted to go to the tent where most of my friends were. It was about 8 o'clock in the evening, and it was already past time where you could not go out of the tent. A SS man sees me. He says, "Halt." I wasn't going to listen to him. I turned around and started running. He started shooting at me. He must have emptied everything, and I could feel the bullets buzzing by my head, and he missed me. I ran back into the tent, a big tent with only one light in the middle. So it was kind of dark. And I ran into it, I said, "Cover me with a blanket real quick." So some of my friends covered me. He came in, he looked, he couldn't find me. But the irony of this was, Allies bombed that Zeltenlager that night. And the tent where I wanted to go to was hit with a bomb. Many people were killed. In the morning, there were bodies, blown up bodies on the ground. And this is the first time I saw cannibalism. People were picking up pieces of flesh and tried to eat it. From there, we were taken out on a death march again. And again, marched about 3-4 days. I didn't know where we were going. And we arrived at a camp called Gunskirchen in Austria. When we talk about camps, they were all bad. But let me tell you, Gunskirchen was the worst of all the camps I've been in. There was just no order there. It was in a forest. There were about 20,000 people, no facilities, nothing. Hundreds and hundreds of bodies kept dying. We were all full of lice. I couldn't sleep in the barrack because there were too many dead bodies. So I took a blanket which I found, shared it with a friend of mine, and we slept outside on the ground. It was very wet at that time. It was in May, end of April, beginning of May. And I told my friend, we have to get out of this place. We're gonna die here. So we decided the following day we will run away from the camp. And when I got up in the morning, we're ready to run away. Someone says Americans came in, and I saw Americans on a Jeep come in, and assessment were gone, and I was liberated. I walked out of the camp, and we walked. I didn't know where I was going, but then instinct told me if the American army is going to the left, I better go to the right. So all the places already liberated. And the American soldiers put us in some barracks which belonged to former German soldiers. And from there, I met the Jewish soldiers from the Jewish brigade. And what a sight that was for me to see Jewish boys with the Magen David with guns. It was unreal. And they collected all the Jewish children that they found in that place in Austria, took us to Italy, where their headquarters was, and they're from Italy in the Alps, and then towards southern part of Italy, Santa Maria de Bagni, a little town. They put us up in Beit Itomim, orphanage. And I was by myself. I didn't know who was alive. And I was going to do what the Jewish soldiers told me. They were going to take me to Aliyah, to Eretz Israel. One day, a few months later, a man comes into the orphanage. He puts his arms around me and he says, what would you think if you would find your mother? I looked at him and I didn't know what he was talking about. He says, come take a walk with me. So I walked out with him. The orphanage was on a hill. So as I walked out on the hill, he says, come walk with me. So I walked down the hill and he says, look ahead. I looked ahead and I saw a woman coming. That was my mother. I ran down the hill. She ran up the hill. This is how I met my mother after the war. The way she came to Italy to look for me, that when I was in that little orphanage, there was a reporter from Tel Aviv, the newspaper, I think it was Davar at that time. They interviewed me and they wanted to know where I come from and so on. And I gave my name and I told them that I have a cousin in Tel Aviv and so on. Someone read that interview in Hungary who knew my mother, and she said, he sounds like your son. So she traveled all the way from Hungary to Italy, and this is how she found me. And then we stayed in Italy, and then I got reunited with my sister. My mother and sister survived together. They were two strong women, and they were able to make it. And then we stayed in Italy for 4 years, and we found that we had a very large family in the United States. My mother had four brothers and 2 sisters, so they came to the US many years ago. So this is how we wound up in the United States. But my sister married one of the Israeli soldiers from the brigade, and she came to Israel in 1946. So this is in a capsule my story. I could go on and on and on with little masiyot, aval. Anyway, this is my story. Thank you for listening to me.
Very, very much for sharing. This is a very emotional story. It would be great if any of you from Anoda could ask questions. You can either ask on video or on chat. So does anybody have any questions for Dr. Clevs?
I do. First, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. I was just wondering if you can tell us a little bit, how did your mother and sister survive this hell?
Yeah. See, the nice thing is that my mother and my sister were liberated in January. I was liberated in May. The difference of the few months was life and death. Because they were together in a labor camp, they protected each other. Both women were physically very strong women. This is how they made it. If they would have had to last in the camps another few months, I don't know if they would have made it. Most of the people died of hunger in the last few months of the war. This is how my father died in Dachau in the last few months.
Who's this question?
Thank you.
We have a question from Debbie Marin.
Well, we had to wait in the United States 4 years. I mean, in Italy for 4 years before we were able to come to the United States.
Wait, let's just first ask that question. Tanya, you want to ask?
What was the last record you found of your father? Did he pass away in the camps where you were separated from him? That's the first question. The second question is, as new immigrants and Jews, how were you received in America? So if you want to answer the first question, how did your father pass away in the camps? And
the question, did he die from beating? Did he die from starvation? Or did they just shoot him? I don't know, but he's buried in a mass grave not far from Dachau. And a few years ago, we all, my wife and my daughter went to the mass grave.
and we said Kaddish at the grave.
And I've obviously said Kaddish for him there.
And then as new immigrants and Jews, how were you received in America?
Well, well, we had a large family. There were at least 100 relatives here when we came. And yeah, they were very nice to us, and they helped us.
You changed your name.
And they changed my name, yeah. Abraham in Europe at one moment that my name was not good enough here in Chicago, so they made it to Arnold. And my name Klavansky was too long, so they made it to Clevs. Anyway, I always say I was circumcised twice.
Are there any other questions?
There isn't a question, but hi, I'm Yael, and I just wanted to tell you that thank you for sharing your story. I'm a third generation Holocaust survivor. My grandfathers from both sides were in Auschwitz also, so I know the story. As a kid, I heard a lot about it. Of course, they didn't tell our parents because they skipped that generation. They told the third generation. And I think that our mission is, of course, not to forget and to share and pass the legacy and the memories that our families passed. And there is a sentence that I don't recall where I saw it, but it's make the past part of our present, and it will be live in the future. It will be live in the future. And I think that this is something that we all now in our generation should tell the stories and pass it on, that in the future it will be. So thank you very much for your for sharing your story. It was really emotional.
Thank you very much for allowing me to share the story with you.
Of course.
We have another question. Why did your sister go to Florence?
she fell in love with the Israeli soldier.
Okay. And they chose Florence.
They went. Yeah, there was a company stationed near Florence in Siena.
Okay. And then another question, did you ever go back to the camps?
I went back to Dachau a couple of years ago, and when I talked to the heads of the archives in Dachau, I wanted to know, why did they take me from Dachau to Poland, Birkenau, in the middle of the war when the Germans needed all the trains? The answer was, to kill you there. I said, so why didn't they kill me in Dachau? They ran out of firewoods at the crematorium, but they had enough left in Birkenau. That's why they sent me there, to be killed there.
Also from Debbie, were you discriminated against when you arrived in the States?
No, I was not. I was accepted very nicely. I served for a couple of years in the United States Air Force. I finished with the rank of captain. They were very nice to make sure I have matzah for Pesach and would let me off on Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. They were very nice to me.
And then also Debbie asks again, did you reconnect with any of your friends who survived the camps?
Yes, I used to come very often to Israel. We used to celebrate our liberation on May the 5th. Ze haya yom ha-uledet shelanu. When we celebrated the celebration together, they're out of the 131 originally, we are about 8 left, and they live in Israel.
And there was a documentary that was made about 20 years ago.
Yeah, it's Yom Huledet.
And they air it every year in Israel.
On Yom HaShoah, yeah.
So if you catch it on TV, that's my father and his group of boys. Also another question from Sabrina, were there any other family members and or friends survivors?
No, they were all shot. Oh, my uncle, my aunts, my cousins, they were all shot in the first 2 weeks of the war because they lived in small towns. They liquidated the Jews in Lithuania in the first few weeks of the war.
Does anyone have any other questions before? Yeah, they're also asking if you could show your tattoo. A question from Yael, do you have grandchildren?
Yes, I have 4 grandchildren. Kulam tzabarim ve'kulam beYerushalayim.
Amazing.
Yes,
Hopefully you'll get to see them soon.
B'ezrat Hashem.
I want to thank you so much again. I want to tell everybody that even more so because unfortunately your wife passed away a month ago and we are all very sad to hear this. And we wish she could have been here with you.
Yes.
And we all really appreciate your story. And we hope for better times and to get to see you in person when you come to Israel.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
We want to invite, it's a little surprise. We invited a very, very special musician. His name is Noam Banai. He's with us right now, he joined. He's Meir Banai's son, which is a very, very famous singer in Israel.
Mm-hmm.
He's going to play us 2 songs. And then we're gonna all sing Tikva together.
Okay.
And we're all gonna stand up for you and for the 6 million Jews.
Thank you.
So Noam Banai, I'm gonna put you as a spotlight video, and you can start your 2 songs.
שומעים אותי? קודם כל נראה שבכלל שומעים.
Yes, we hear you.
כן? אוקיי, יופי. אני רק רציתי לומר באמת, אין לי הרבה מה לומר מעבר לזה שזה זכות ענקית וכבוד עצום בשבילי לשיר לבן אדם כמוך, שמבחינתי הוא לא פחות מגיבור.
טוב להכיר אותך.
נעים להכיר.
תודה.
אז באמת, אין לי הרבה מה לומר מעבר לזה שזה פשוט זכות ענקית. אני אשיר את שער הרחמים של אבא, ואז אני אשיר גם שיר זיכרון שאני כתבתי. מסתובב בעיר הישנה ורעש בא מכל פינה, אני מכיר כבר את דרכי, הדרך לשער הרחמים. לא מביט סביב, לא מקשיב, איש חולם אני, וכך היה תמיד, אבל מכיר כבר את דרכי, הדרך אל שער הרחמים. חי פעם, רק פעם, יש טעם, אין טעם, עם כוח, בלי כוח, שער הרחמים. בואי איתי יחד, בואי מתוך הפחד, כי את גם את חלק משער הרחמים. השלטים מעל החנויות משקיפים על הרחובות, בתוך ליבי יש צעקה והיא גדולה, הראו לי את שער הרחמים. חי פעם, רק פעם, יש טעם, אין טעם, עם כוח, בלי כוח, שער הרחמים. בואי איתי יחד, בואי מתוך הפחד, כי את גם את חלק משער הרחמים. זה שיר שנקרא זיכרונות, השיר השני שרציתי לשיר לכם הולך ככה. בסוף כולנו זיכרונות של אהבה, ואם זה ככה מי אתה, אולי ריח יום שישי, אולי האור החם, המרפסת הנושמת, או הכוכבים מעל, בסוף כולנו זיכרונות של אהבה, ואם זה ככה מי אני? אולי הילד האהוב, אולי האבא החומר, אולי אתה, אולי אנחנו, זיכרון אחד שלם. נשאר רק עוד ארגז אחד שלך פה בעולם הזה, ניקח אותו איתנו בדרכים וטוטפות על ליבנו. בסוף כולנו רסיסי חלום שבור, דמעות זולגות ומתייבשות, עץ נבול ליד אגם קטן מלא תקוות גדולות, כולנו חלומות.
תודה, נועם.
תודה רבה לכם על הזכות.
אז
ממש ככה. אנחנו עכשיו רוצים לעשות את שירת התקווה.
אז רגע. כולנו נעמוד.
תודה רבה, נועם.
תודה לכם.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, really. It was so special.
Thank you. You're special. Am Israel is special for me.
תודה רבה, נועם. And hopefully better days.
Thank you, everyone.
תודה לכולם. ביי.
Thank you, and be healthy and keep on telling your story. Amazing story.
Thank you.
Thank you.